This is a very special weekend. Please give it up for Mr. Eric Von Daniken. Eric.
Thank you. You are the greatest. Thank you for your introduction. Perfect. Okay. So, okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I'm from Switzerland. My English is not the best. I still have a heavy German accent, but I hope you will understand it. So, it's a long, long time ago. No one knows how long, but at least 6,000 years. And then a gigantic spaceship surrounded our planet. How do we know this? We know it first from old Indian texts. There are many, many old Indian texts which are at least 6,000 years old. And there, in the 5th book of the Mahabharata, with the name Mausala Purva, there you can read that of a sudden, 3 cities, they call it cities, not spaceships, because they had no word for spaceships. 3 cities surrounded our planet Earth. The people who were watching these cities in the firmament, they were talking about them. And all of a sudden, from these 3 cities, smaller vehicles descended to our planet. The old Indians called these smaller vehicles Vimanas. There were different types of Vimanas, not only one shape. It's like today we have different types of aircrafts. A helicopter doesn't look the same thing like as a jumbo jet, or a propellant aircraft is not the same thing as a jet airliner. So there were different types of Vimanas. Now, and out of these smaller vehicles, we would call them today space shuttle. All of a sudden, so-called gods came out. So-called gods. We all know that there are no gods. There's only one God. But our ancestors, in Stone Age people, they could not understand what was going on, so they believed that these visitors are some gods. The word gods is a misunderstanding. They were never gods. They were called the extraterrestrial gods. So these so-called gods came out, they looked around the planet, and they chose a few of the young men to teach them. One of the young men, his name was Arjuna, and Arjuna was brought up to the sky. He learned the language of the extraterrestrials. They taught him in writing, and later they brought him back to the planet Earth. And here, of course, the people asked him, Arjuna, where have you been? What have you seen? And Arjuna was writing down his experiences with the so-called gods. He said, he was up there, in this city over the planet. And as higher he came, he saw a lot of smaller cities up there. Some of them were composite that they looked like different bulls, one bull next to the other bull. That's what the eyewitness Arjuna said 6,000 years ago. He himself was brought up with an object called the Vimana. As I said before, the Vimanas were a smaller object. Arjuna even knows the name of his pilot who brought him up there. His pilot's name was Matali. They brought him up there. He saw gigantic cities. He called them cities because in his time he had no word for spaceship, neither for mother spaceship. He was taught up there. He learned the language of these extraterrestrials. And then he realized that these extraterrestrials, they had fights, discrepancies among them each other. Some of these extraterrestrials, they wanted to have sex with humans on the planet. Others didn't say, no, that's forbidden. We cannot do this. Some of them want to steal our raw material. Others say, no, we are not allowed to do this. So there was a fight in heaven, a war in heaven, described by Arjuna in the 5th book of the Mahabharata in the Mausala Purva. 2 of these cities were destroyed. And from the earthlings, it looks as if 10,000 of little stones are falling down from the sky. Now when we hear such a story, 6,000 years old, our first reaction is, this is all fantasy. That's all dreams. A war in the sky, a war in heaven, that's rubbish. They simply had dreams. But it's not the dream. The funny thing is, every mythology, every great mythology, start with Greek mythology, it doesn't matter what, starts with the war in heaven. In Greece, for example, the god Zeus first has to fight against Kronos. Take our own religion, be Jewish or Christian. When I was a boy, they teach me, Eric, when you finally die and you were a brave man, you will go to heaven. Heaven is the place of happiness. In heaven you are assembled with God and the angels. And later I learned as an adult, there was a fight, a war in heaven. Don't you remember? All of a sudden an archangel with the name of Lucifer comes to the throne of the Almighty God and said, we don't serve you anymore. And then the archangel Michael came to destroy Lucifer and his disciples. If heaven would have been the place of absolute happiness, then a war in heaven is impossible. Then you are happy. Then you have no opposition, nothing. So we should change the word heaven into sky or into space. Then it makes sense. The same situation we have with the word like angels. We are taught that angels are the good ones. You know, angels, they are represented in Stone Age cave paintings with helmets, halos. We make designs, they have wings. They were the nice guys, the angels. But in reality, some of these angels were a catastrophe. They killed and destroyed thousands and thousands of people directly from the air. Here, for example, this is in Egypt. This is the temple called Edfu. And on this wall of the Edfu temple, this wall of the Edfu temple is described how a god, his name was Horhut, came down and helped the pharaoh. The pharaoh said, please, I need your help because I'm surrounded by enemies. Now this god with the name of Horhut destroyed all the enemies of the pharaoh from the air. Now this is in Egypt. But the same story we read in the Bible. Just take the 2nd book of the Kings. For example, this is one of the warriors called the god Ahura Mazda from Persia. The same story we have in the Bible. Just read, for example, the 2nd book of the Kings, chapter 19, verse 35. And there it says, and the angel came down from heaven and killed 185,000 Assyrians. On the next morning, there were only dead bodies on the ground. An angel from heaven killed 185,000 Assyrians. We have to change the word angel into the word extraterrestrial. Now I changed 2 words. I changed heaven into space. I changed angels into extraterrestrials. Now, we just have to change 10 keywords in the ancient text. And I changed the whole context of the old text. And it's time we do this. We really have to do this. So, we have these inscriptions of the so-called angels, but the angels were extraterrestrials. And one of the very clear descriptions, which you easily can control, and which was part of Chariots of the Gods, which I wrote more than 50 years ago, comes from the Bible. Remember the story in the Bible concerning the prophet Ezekiel? Ezekiel, you find him at the end of the Bible, the end of the Old Testament. And I first now show you 5 pictures coming out of old Bible. I mean old Bible, 200 years old. Simply to give an impression what our forefather had in mind when they read the text of Ezekiel. Later, I'll explain you how we came to make a modern explanation of the whole Ezekiel story. And finally, I will show you a computer animation concerning Ezekiel, which is one of the best you can ever see. So, Ezekiel, by the way, you have to know by profession. He was priest, high priest at the Temple of Jerusalem. On his time, roughly 600 BC, the Jewish community, Jerusalem, was captured by the Babylonians. And all the high society of the Jewish community went as slaves to Babylonia, including Ezekiel. As a high priest, he belonged to the high society, so he was a slave in Babylonia. And he writes, They were working there for the Babylonians, and all of a sudden the firmament opened. These people, the slaves, hear the noise in the firmament. They saw a light and something was coming down. They all were afraid. Of course, they believed God is visiting us. Ezekiel, as a high priest, he's the first one who thinks, I have to give honor to the God. So he has the first one, he stands up, and then he realizes this is not God. And he describes what happened. So this is Ezekiel out of an old Bible. And just before him, he sees a gigantic thing. He calls this gigantic object, the whole thing, he calls the splendorness of God. The whole thing is the splendorness of God, or the splendorness of the highest. Now, I must make a personal remark. I was educated in a Catholic boarding school, led by Jesuits. We had to translate part of the Bible, including Ezekiel, from Greek to Latin and from Latin to German. And in the original Ezekiel, the word God never appears. In our translations, be it the German or the English translation, we read the splendorness of God. In the original, it says the splendorness of the highest, which is quite a difference. So all this together, he calls it the splendorness of the highest. He says, up there, I saw something like glittering rays. There was a throne inside, and on this throne, the highest was sitting. In your Bible translation, it says, on the throne, God was sitting. No, in the original of the Ezekiel. Then he saw 4 living creatures, and he says, these 4 living creatures had wings. Each one had 4 wings, and when the wings moved, a terrible noise appeared. Ezekiel describes the noise and compares the noise with the thundering waterfall. So these wings must have made a terrible noise. Then he describes the legs. The legs were out of metal, definitely. So I got to read the metal. And then he comes and describes the wheel. He sees 4 wheels, and now he does not understand anything anymore. You know, wheels at Ezekiel's time, they can go forward and backward. A normal wheel. But the wheels you see here, on the splendor of the highest, they can go forward, backward, right and left at the same time without making a steering movement. Imagine you're sitting in your car. Now you have your steering wheel. Now you turn because you want to go to the curve. The front wheels turn because you go into the curve. Ezekiel describes a wheel which goes forward, backward, right and left without ever make a turning movement. That's what confuses him completely. He describes this wheel 4 times. And then finally the legs, the body, and all the details. So this you all can read in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel. I just have assumed a few keywords. Roughly 35 years ago, I had a secret speech here in the United States, in Huntsville, at NASA, you know, the Space Administration. Secret because we both parties, NASA and I, we agreed not to go to public. NASA did not public that Eric von Däniken was there, and I did not public that I was at NASA. All the main rocket people, professors, engineers were there, including Werner von Braun, etc. After my speech at NASA, we had a dinner, and then Mr. Joe Blumrich came to me. Blumrich was at that time the head of construction department at NASA. He was coming originally from Austria, so he speaks German and English fluently. And while we had dinner, he came to me and said, Eric, that was quite fascinating. But you know, you spoke about the prophet called Ezekiel in the Bible, but in the Bible you will definitely never find any technology. You know, the Bible, these are visions. These are dreams. They saw God on his throne driving around, but this is not reality. It's just imagination. You will never find any technology in the Bible. Anyhow, he meant very friendly. I am the first one who pointed him to Ezekiel. He never heard something about Ezekiel in his life before. And he told me, now I want to read the Bible. Soon in the next weeks when I have time, I want to read this Ezekiel personally. And he did. He started to read Ezekiel word by word. And he got very confused because Ezekiel makes very, very clear statements. Statements how big the wheel was, how big he was, etc. So you could draw conclusions. Then 2 other NASA engineers came to Blumrich's office and asked him, Joseph, what are you doing with the Bible on your desk? We are engineers, we are rocket constructors. And he said, you remember this von Däniken here talking us about the Bible? This is fascinating. I just read this Ezekiel story. We really are able to reconstruct what Ezekiel was describing. You remember, Ezekiel described the whole object as the splendorness of the highest. Now NASA analyzed phrase by phrase of Ezekiel. They start to make designs and they start to make calculations. And finally, they had the object, the scribe on it. And this was what it looked like. This is what Ezekiel called the splendorness of the highest. So the whole thing, the totality, is the splendorness of the highest. On the top, he saw something glittering. And inside, there was a chair, a throne. And on this throne, the highest was sitting. The throne was nothing else than the chair of the commander of the spaceship. And he has his spacesuits on. That's why he was glittering. And then he describes the wings, the wings which make a terrible noise, and he describes the detail, including the wheel. And now it becomes complicated. You know, wheels, I told you at Ezekiel's time, they can go forward and backward. But Ezekiel describes the wheel which goes forward and backward and right and left at the same time, which confuses him completely. Now NASA started to reconstruct a new wheel. This new wheel is separated in different sections. Every section has its own wheel, which you can turn on one side or the other side. Of course, with that wheel, you can go forward or backward. If this wheel should move towards you, only the lower section would move towards you or back. And with this wheel, you can go in any direction without making a movement. The wheel never turns, as our wheel at the car. In every direction, right on the ankle, you can move with this. By the way, NASA received an international patent for that wheel. I think that's very funny. We have a patent on the wheel. It's at the moment, they use it on Mars, on the Mars robot, but the original idea comes from Ezekiel. Now, when you read Ezekiel, you will realize that Ezekiel describes the splendors of the highest, this object, from chapter 1 to 40. And in chapter 41, something different happened. He says, the splendors of the highest arrived again. That means a second time. The space shuttle was descending a second time to Ezekiel. And this time, Ezekiel writes, the hand of the highest took me on my chest and put me on the chair. In my modern interpretation, simply he was taken up to the co-pilot's seat. Then the splendors of the highest goes up. Ezekiel feels the gravity on his chest. He said, and the hand of the highest pressed upon my chest. But he has no idea where they go. So he writes in the Bible, they brought me to a very, very high mountain. He states clearly, not a high mountain, a very, very high mountain. They were flying over the mountain, and all of a sudden, under him, something like a big village or a little city appears with different houses. And in the center of this city is something like a temple. Ezekiel, in his books, does not say in the original, it was a temple. He says, it looked like a temple, because he doesn't know what it is. Maybe you have to ask yourself the question, what is a temple? What was a temple 5,000 years ago? A temple was a building for the gods, nothing else. Later, we made out temple spiritually for the gods. In antiquity, it was simply a house where gods, the so-called gods, the extraterrestrials, were living. So they are flying over this little city, and beneath them is something like a temple. And the splendors of the highest. And Ezekiel is sitting in there, slowly goes into the building, and he hears the noise of the wheels at that time, in every detail. Finally, they came to a standstill. of a sudden, one of these glittering beings, a man, human-like being, glittering clothes, comes to Ezekiel. And in the beginning, he says, he looks at Ezekiel and says, oh, humans, you have eyes to see, but you see nothing. You have ears to hear, but you hear nothing. And then this stranger, of a sudden, has a measuring device in his hands. And he orders Ezekiel, now you measure this building, every detail. Ezekiel, in the meantime, knows clearly this is not God. He's not afraid again. He asks back, why should I measure this building? And the other one says, that's the reason why we brought you here. And he starts to measure. Length, large, every step, every stone, every detail. Read it in Ezekiel, starting at chapter 41. Pages of measurement. These measurements, a German engineer, his name was Hans-Herbert Bayer, he studied these measurements. And he asked himself, is this a real building or is this just biblical imagination? And like Blumrich did, the NASA people only reconstructed the splendorness of the highest, the whole body. And now this German engineer group only reconstructs the so-called temple, the building. One day, I received a large letter at my desk at home, yellow envelope with 30 pages in there, and there I saw fantastical technical designs and the letter of a German engineer. I didn't know him personally at that time, Mr. Hans-Herbert Bayer, and he said, dear Mr. von Däniken, we reconstructed the building according to Ezekiel's measurement. We did not add 1 centimeter, 1 inch. We did nothing take off. We exactly took the dates which Ezekiel gave us in the Bible. And this was the reconstruction. That's how this building looked like. I was very confused and very happy. I visited this engineer, Hans-Herbert Bayer, and I asked him, do you have an idea what NASA made? You remember, NASA only reconstructed the flying machine, the splendors of the highest. The German engineers only reconstructed the house, the building. The German, of course, knew nothing about the American scientists. I brought the two groups together, and both fit perfectly together. But the so-called temple was simply the earthly space station, for the space shuttle. Had nothing to do with the holy thing. Now, once you have made these analyses, you should tell something about the Bible. I told you I had in young years translated the Ezekiel, and I know what's the story in there. In theology, and these are honest and wonderful people, it's not a question of conspiracy. In theology, they believe that Ezekiel has a vision. He sees the Almighty God sitting on a chair on his throne, flying around. Now, I personally, I am a deep believer in God. Still today, I am one of these few persons who pray. But my God does not need a vehicle in which to move around from point A to point B. My God is all over. And the vehicle of God does not make noise and trembling and loud noise and sand blowing up and heat, etc. So I don't believe in the vision. I say, no, that was not a vision, that was a reality. Now, theologians believe that Ezekiel has the visions. He sees the Almighty God on his flying chariot of the God flying around. And then in the second part of the Bible, where Ezekiel gives all this measurement of this building, the theologians believe now he has a vision of a future temple in the future Jerusalem, which is completely rubbish again. If you know the Hebrew language, the original written form in which Ezekiel was written, it's written in a Semitic language. In the Semitic language, you have only consonants, R, N, Y, etc. But no R, R, E, O, etc. And from the grammatic, there is no future. It all is written in the present. So there was a temple. I saw the temple. I measured it. Now theologians, they believe he has a vision of the future. So when you read Ezekiel, you will read there, and there will be a temple, which will be so long and so large, etc., which is not correct. The correct translation is not there will be in the future. The correct translation is there was a building so long, so large, etc. By the way, theological version does not function anyhow not. Ezekiel describes, and they brought me on a very, very high mountain. Where in Jerusalem, or near Jerusalem, is a very, very high mountain. I know the region, nothing, a few hills, that's all that's there. Nothing of a high mountain. They brought him on a very, very high mountain. He doesn't fit to Jerusalem, neither to the future of Jerusalem. He was on a complete different place. Now, we made a computer animation to explain you what Ezekiel really saw. Look at this. They were slaves, they were captured by the Babylonians on the river with the name of Chebar. And then they hear a noise in the sky. In orbit is a mother spaceship. From this mother spaceship, a smaller vehicle is left out. Only when the smaller vehicle reaches the atmosphere, the noise begins. Outside, where there is no air, you hear no noise. Only now. So they hear the noise. They see a vehicle coming down. They are all afraid. Ezekiel, as a high priest, is afraid, but his colleagues, the slaves, the workers are all afraid. They all fell on the ground. They all believe, now we see the real Almighty God. Ezekiel, as a high priest, as the first, he stands up because he wants to give reverence and honor to the Almighty God. And then Ezekiel realizes, this is not God. And then he starts to write, to describe what he sees, the wings, the wheels, the noise, the detail, everything. He describes what he sees and the splendorness of the highest. He gives the detail of the wheels. He realized that the wheels can go in all four their directions without making a steering movement, which confuses him completely. He writes it down 4 times. Then he was taking himself up. They put him on the chair of the co-pilot, and they fly away. And Ezekiel feels, when they start the pressure, he says, and the hand of the highest pressed upon my chest. He doesn't know where they go. That's why he writes, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. He doesn't know the name of the mountain, but definitely it was not Jerusalem. Neither Jerusalem at his time nor in the future. Up there, he sees something like a small city, and in the center of it, something like a temple, a building of the gods. He's sitting in the splendor of the highest himself. I assume his co-pilot would have calmed him down and said, don't be afraid, human, don't be afraid. Just write everything down what you realize here, because you have to write it down for your future generations. So Ezekiel writes what he sees. The splendors of the highest came to a standstill over this building, the so-called temple. Slowly, they sunk into the building. At that occasion, Ezekiel writes, and the noise of the wheels were at that time double as loud as before in the desert, because now he hears the echo. The echo comes back from the walls. The noise is double as loud. Finally, the splendor of the highest came to a standstill. Ezekiel can stand out, and then some of these extraterrestrials arrive in his glittering clothes. When he sees Ezekiel, he simply says, oh, come on, humans. You humans have eyes to see, but you see nothing. You have ears to hear, but you hear nothing. And then all of a sudden, he has a measuring device, and he orders Ezekiel to measure the whole temple. And Ezekiel does measure the temple. Ezekiel has the courage to ask back, why? Why should I measure this temple? And the other says, that's the reason why we brought you here. Then the Ezekiel book stops. The Ezekiel book in the Bible stops abruptly. It has no final. We don't have the whole Ezekiel text. So why should a group of extraterrestrials take from a group of humans, the group of slaves, the leader, Ezekiel? Why should they bring him to their space station on a high mountain? Why should they ask him, you have to make measurements? Why? What's all the purpose of all that? At Ezekiel's time, they all believed this is the real God, the God of the universe. Ezekiel himself is a high priest. They captured his high priest. They brought him away. Maybe for a few hours, maybe for a day, what do we know? And then they brought him back to his people. Now his people, his friends, his colleagues are asking him, Ezekiel, you are back here, wonderful. Are you in good health? Have you been hungry, thirsty? Have you had pain, something? But Ezekiel is very happy. He says, no, I was on a very, very high mountain. I was flying there. There was a temple. I had to measure the temple. Here are the measurement dates. Because his society believes that all this has to do with the real God, the omnipotent God. And Ezekiel himself is a high priest. His measurement dates and his rapport is not thrown away to ashes. They keep it into the holy books. They believe it has to do with God, the real God. The extraterrestrials knew exactly this primitive society will grow up, will develop a technological evolution. 3,000 or 4,000 years later, the holy texts are still here. Normal texts, they disappear, but not the holy books. The holy books are translated into many languages, as we have it with the Bible and Ezekiel. So they read the future society, maybe 3,000, 4,000 years later, they will read this text of Ezekiel. The future society are still strong believers in God, but not low believers in God, in so little gods which does not exist. They will realize, hi, this is a technological description. Wheels, which can go in every direction. Legs out of metal. The splendorness, the wings we make noise. They will realize this is technology, which somebody described thousands of years in the past. And now the humans will start to ask questions. They will ask questions, maybe, did we have a higher society before, a higher technological advanced society? Or was this a visit from outer space? And if it was a visit from outer space, where is the proof? Have these extraterrestrials just disappeared without leaving something? That's exactly what they wanted. Because of Ezekiel. And not only of Ezekiel. In Old Indian, we have Arjuna, the one who was taken away too. And in other texts. They want that the future societies stubborn open these texts. They have to read these texts. They say, hey, come on, something is wrong with our past. And that's exactly what we have today. Because of Ezekiel, because of these old texts, we have this new question with question marks. That's what they wanted. They wanted to bring us to the question, what is the proof? What is the time capsule? What is the what something these so-called gods left behind it? Another story which I just come very short with is Enoch. Enoch in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you just read 2 phrases about him. All what you read, Enoch was the 7th patriarch before the great flood. The 7th patriarch, the first was Adam, the second was his son Seth, etc. Enoch was the 7th before the great flood. And the Bible said Enoch was the first human who disappeared in a flying chariot from the earth. So the Jewish community and the Christian community believes that Enoch disappeared with God, but one day he has to return with his body to die here on this planet. So in the Bible, you have only 2 phrases about Enoch. So where does this book of Enoch comes from? 180 years ago, a British British explorer came to Ethiopia. He was also looking for God 180 years ago. And he went into a convent and he learned the language of Ethiopian at that time. And once he knew the language, he went to the old library of the convent, and in the library he found the book of Enoch. He knew the word Enoch from the Bible, but now a book of Enoch. So he translated the book of Enoch from old Ethiopian first into English, later from English into German. Now, I can only show you a German version. You know, these are very big volumes. The Apocryphon of Epigraph, this Old Testament, by Professor Dr. Emil Kau translated. And in there, we find 126 pages about the book of Enoch. What is so fascinating about Enoch? He writes in the first person, I version, eyewitness. Not in the second person, not I hear, they told me. No, he says what happened to him. So he describes that he was 12 years old. The whole village wanted to go to sleep. Then they hear the noise in the sky. They saw a light in the sky. And they all were afraid and run away, except he said, I was standing there. Then the light comes down to the earth. And 2 beings come out close to Enoch. The 2 beings in glittering clothes. It was all glittering. Now, Enoch was afraid too, and he fell down on the ground. He writes in his book, I smelled the human urge, the humidity of the earth. Anyhow, all of a sudden, he's taken up on his shoulder, and somebody speaks in his language. Don't be afraid, human, we won't hurt you. Now, for the first time, we have to ask ourselves, how come that extraterrestrials speak the language of Enoch? It's very easy. In our time, and some 100 years ago, our ethnologists went to the upper Amazon River, or to the upper Nile in Africa, and they came together with different tribes. Now, these different tribes had wonderful cultures, but none of them spoke English or German or Spanish or whatever French. They had their local language. It was never a problem for the ethnologists to learn the language of the natives. It's a question of 3, 4, 5 months, and you can talk together. These extraterrestrials who were here thousands of years ago, they rehearsed themselves like today's ethnologists would do. They observed a certain group. By observing, they learned their language. With their technology, computer, etc., they would have learned the language immediately, probably in 2 or 3 weeks. So when some of the extraterrestrials speaks the language of Enoch, I am not shocked. It's absolutely normal. They can use it. So the one says to Enoch, don't be afraid, human. We won't hurt you. They say, if you wish, we take you with us and we teach you. And the young Enoch is not afraid. He says, yes, I wish. So they take him away. They bring him up to the sky. He describes it in every detail. He sees giant objects over the earth. Of course, he also does not have a word like spaceship. He says giant diamonds are up there, glittering, doors open. We entered into the door. He came to different gardens. He came to a big room with a throne in the center. And there the highest was sitting, etc., etc. Like Arjuna in the Hindu mythology, Enoch learns the language of these extraterrestrials. Once he knows the language, they give him a writing device and they dictate him books. Many, many books. He says, they dictated me more than 100 books. All books about science, about astronomy, about the calendar, etc. Enoch is the first one, by the way, who gives the names of these extraterrestrials. They sound like this. Look. And these are the names of their leaders. The name of the first is Jekun. He's the one to seduce the children of men, etc. Enoch gives 36 languages. So I even know the names of these fellows who were here thousands of years ago. And these group of human-like beings, obviously they wanted sex. They wanted sex with beautiful daughters on this planet Earth. And this was forbidden. The commander of the spaceship said, you are not allowed to have a sexual contact with them. So there was a mutiny on board. They were against the commander. And they went down and had sex with humans. Enoch describes it like this. Look. But when the sons of heavens saw that the daughters of men were fair, they admired them and desired to mate with them. And they said to each other, we will take them as wives. Altogether, there were 200 which descended upon the mountain Hermon of the days of Jared. Jared is the father of Enoch. Now you think this is again imagination? Hey, some extraterrestrials wanted to sex with humans. I'm sorry, just look at the Bible. We have the same thing here. In the Bible, first book of Moses. When the humans began to multiply and have daughters, the sons of the gods, in some translation you can read the fallen angels, saw that they were fair and they took them as their wives. Not only Enoch. The same thing in Hindu mythology, there was sex between the extraterrestrials and the humans. Why should they have the same body, the same sexual apparatus as we? I come back to this at the end of my speech. So Enoch describes what happened. They dictate him all kind of things. One example, I always hear from the critics and the skeptics, come on, Eric, Enoch, the book of Enoch, this is all a dream. He had a dream. That's all. Now, Enoch describes, my leader said to me, human, look out of the window. Do you see this little light out there? You humans, you call it moon, but the moon has no light by itself. The moon receives his light from the sun. And then he explains him why the moon sometimes disappears, is full, is half, etc. The teacher of Enoch says to him, young human, you see this glittering, bright, shining light? You humans, you call it the sun. You see the other little lights here in the sky, on the night sky? You call it stars. Each star is a sun like your sun. And he explains how planetary systems function. He explains that around our planet, our sun, different planets turn, including the Earth, in 365 days, plus leak hours, not leak year, leak hours. So many these are astronomical details. This is scientific details. You cannot dream that. A human in Stone Age, before the Great Flood, he was teach. They also teach him in astronomy, they teach him in calendar, they teach him in engineering, in all kind of things. And he writes, all this I handed down to my son Methuselah with the order, no, you, my son Methuselah, keep all this, keep it for the human generations after the Great Flood. They told him that the gigantic Great Flood will come. Do you remember the Great Flood? Everybody remembers that. And in the Bible they said, well, it was the punishment of God. But I know 100 mythologies of the planet. And in every mythology you have a great flood. You know, the Indians in the highland of Colombia, or the Indians somewhere, the Eskimos in Alaska, the Inuit, it doesn't matter, far in Africa, they all know the story of the Great Flood. And remember, it was always a so-called God who descended, who warned the group of the human, who warned them in advance a gigantic flood would come. None of these gods was an omnipotent God. Could not like a miracle just like, here you have a ship. Now, they give them order, you have to construct a ship. To construct a ship means falling trees, measurement, building. To construct a ship is technology. To construct a ship, this takes at least 1 year, if not more than 1 year. So all these so-called gods, they knew at least 1 year ahead that the gigantic flood was coming. Not like just us, weather forecast, well, in 2 weeks it will rain. Forget it. It was planned long before. Otherwise, they could not build a ship. Technology, they knew it exactly. So they did. Forefathers, prehistory time, everything was destroyed by the flood. To reprint, to show their coming generations how the gods look like. Very brief. This is near Switzerland, in the border to Italy. It's called Val Camonica. This here is in your country, Arizona, at the Hopi territory. When you fly to Nazca in Peru, this gigantic figure here is one arm pointed to the sky, the other pointed to the ground, 29 meters high, flying on the way to Nazca, direct before the plain of Nazca. Even in archaeology, they call it the Great Martian God. All these so-called gods. Here you cannot see nothing because it's near the city of Ica. Ica is in Peru. This figure points directly to the sky. It looks like this. You cannot see it from the ground. You have to fly. Otherwise, you have no chance to see it. The Sahara Desert, Africa. It's far away from South America, from Nazca, far away from the Hopi Indians in your country. Look at this. The origin of the figure is 6 meters high, 6,000 years old. This continues all over the world. This is Australia. The so-called gods were always represented with helmets, with healers, with rays around their heads. Now, this again, Australia. You all realize that between Australia, between North America, Hopi territory, between South America, Nazca, Peru, between the Sahara Desert, are thousands and thousands of kilometers. There are oceans, and in our prehistoric time, our forefathers had no contact together. You could not just book a fly over there to Las Vegas. So why have they represented their gods all in the same manner, with helmets and halos around their heads? Worldwide. And the people had no contact between each other. Later, they learned to chisel, to make figures. This is in Tulum. Tulum is Mexico, not far from here, directly on the Caribbean Sea. The whole city, the Maya city of Tulum, is dedicated to the descending gods. You see his spread legs here, and the head, and then his hands, like somebody is lying on a bobsledder. His hand, and he always has wings. They fly down from the sky. They are represented like this. The whole city of Tulum is dedicated to the descending gods in Maya. Then worldwide, what we had in cave paintings before, later when they learned to make figures, to chisel, to paint, they represented their gods. This is in the Museum of Guatemala City. But the world is full of these things. This is in Japan. Now today's Guatemala had nothing to do with Japan. This is prehistoric Japan. They call it Dogu figures. The prehistoric Japanese people believe that this is one of the gods. But also in prehistoric times, the Japanese know nothing about glasses. Here. So what have they copied? Why have they represented the gods worldwide in the same way? This one here, this sense, you know, he has a helmet on. He has a mic on his lips. His hands are bending down. His feet upward. This you find in La Venta. La Venta is near the city of Villahermosa in Mexico. He descends to the humans. In your country, the Hopi Indians in Arizona. Just go to the Hopi Indians and go to a souvenir shop there. You find some of these pictures and some of these figures. They are called Kachina figures. Then you ask the Hopi literature, the book of the Hopi, which is scientific literature, what is the Kachinas? What did they mean with Kachinas? The Kachinas were the spiritual teachers from heaven who descended to the forefathers of the Hopi. They teach them in astronomy in different belongings. And the Hopi today still, the Hopi still today make these figures, the Kachina figures. You can buy them in souvenir shops. Kachina pictures. Simply do not forget that these gods were there, our teachers some thousands of years ago, and they promised to return in the future. So we should not forget the visit of the gods a long time ago, because they will return, so we are not afraid. Now this is today's North America, here in your country. Now take 12,000 kilometers away from here, down to South America. The same thing with an Indian tribe called the Kayapo. The Kayapo live on the upper Amazon River. Every year they have a festivity. On this festivity, their shaman dresses in a straw garment, completely covered. He has no openings for eyes, mouth, nose, nothing. And they dance around the straw man. You will just see him. And they sing the story. Long, long time ago, for their forefathers. All of a sudden there was a noise in the sky, and the being descended, a big being. They were all afraid. Finally they realized he did not harm them. They came down out of the village. Now you see the man coming here. Come on. Within 4 days, the stranger learned the language of the native, and he told them his name was Bepe Korosh. Bepe Korosh means I come from the firmament. He teach them in several belongings, as the other cases, in astronomy, in agriculture. He teach them in some forms of weapon, how it was easier to make chasings, etc. And before he left, he promised in the far future he will return again. And in order not to forget his visit, they represent every year this heavenly teacher in the form of a straw garment, straw man, with no opening for mouth or ears, etc. He was a teacher from the sky. Now, if we have such a thing only in North America, the hope is now, it's worldwide. So what do we need more about all these things? They were here, and we have the reports practically in every culture. I don't understand why this is so complicated to understand it. Why our scientific community, especially our archaeologists and ethnologists, they are so blind. They cannot see it, or they don't know it. I love discussions with skeptics. It's wonderful because they lose anyhow. It doesn't matter. But I love the discussions, and when we respect each other, when we are not lying and bluffing and discussing honestly, after 2 hours, they always confess to me, Eric, we didn't know that. We never heard about these books. We never heard the word of Enoch or Ezekiel or anything. We don't know it. As soon as we know it, it all fits together. The cave paintings, the figures, the old writings, and all these things here. Now I have to change the theme very briefly because something I have to explain here which nerves me every year. You know, okay. Chariots of the Gods, Palenque, talking Chariots of the Gods. Sorry, it doesn't come from smoke. I don't smoke, at least not much. So, in Chariots of the Gods, the cover showed a picture of Palenque. Palenque is a Maya city in Central America. And in Palenque, there are different pyramids. They call it temples. And one of these pyramids is called the Temple of Inscription because up there they found 812 inscriptions. And in 1952, Professor Dr. Ruth Slulier discovered up here a groove in the ground, a groove in the bottom. And they chiseled it out, and inside the pyramid there was a staircase. But in 1951, the staircase was completely filled with stone. It took 3 years before all these stones were taken out of the staircase. 3 years later, they landed under the pyramid, 7 meters under the pyramid. They were standing before a big door in the form of a triangle. This was the first time we had such a door in the form of a triangle. The door was opened roughly. They destroyed it partly. The grid was made only today against the visitors. And then they stood in a room. The room was 7 meters high. And from the ceiling to down, the room was full with stalactites and stalagmites. You know, these who grow. That means the room is very, very, very old. Thousands and thousands of years older than the pyramid itself. Later, the pyramid was constructed over the room. The room existed a long time before. And there was this bottom plate, 3 meters 80 long, 2 meters 20 large, one block. And on the plate, an incredible drawing. You can just see it, something like a frame. In the center of the frame is someone sitting, bending forward, almost like a motorizing cyclist. He has an oxygen mask on his nose. He uses his upper hand. You will just see it here. His upper hands to manipulate control. See the lower hands. You still see the forefingers. He's winding up something. He's sitting on a chair. And outside of the frame, outside of the frame, you see a linking flam. Now, this was found in 1952. Of course, archaeology had immediately their explanation. Archaeological explanation, they said it represents Pakal. Pakal was the second last ruler of the city of Palenque. And Pakal is sitting in the open mouth of a mythological monster. You see what? What you see here, these two things here. They see the teeth, the upper teeth, and the lower teeth. That's the open mouth of a mythological monster. Pakal is falling into the monster. Out of his body comes the tree of life, the cross of life, etc., etc. All archaeological nonsense. In the meantime, more than 50 years have passed, and they have learned much more than before. There is a writing all around, and in the meantime, Professor Dr. Stewart and Stewart, he's the father and the son, Stewart, both brilliant American archaeologists, Maya specialists, they are able to translate the writing around it. They said, yes, that's the most modern explanation now after 50 years. Yes, it represents Pakal, but it had nothing to do with the open mouth of a mythological monster, nothing with the tree of life, nothing with the stylized hairs of the beard of the weather god, and all that rubbish, which we are told. The whole plate, the stone plate, has to do completely with the cosmos, with the universe. Pakal is leading our planet Earth. I'm always accused by the skeptics. I'm not allowed to look at this picture crosswise. I should look at it lengthwise. Lengthwise, it looks like this. Now you know I'm a man with fantasy, and they tell me that's the only correct way to look at the plate. Okay? My fantasy jumps to another continent. Far away from Central America, let's go to Indonesia. In Indonesia is a big temple called the Borobudur. The Borobudur is composed of hundreds and hundreds of these stupas. These figures are called stupas. For us, they look like a bell. Stupas. Now in Buddhism, the stupa has different meanings. One of the meanings is the stupa is the smaller vehicle with which you can reach the big vehicle of the god. You remember, Arjuna was taken in a vimana up to the mother spaceship. Ezekiel was taken in a smaller vehicle up to the mountain, mother spaceship, etc. So you always have a smaller vehicle. So in Buddhism, they believe the stupa is the smaller vehicle in which you can reach the big vehicle of the gods. Now every stupa is not empty. In every stupa, somebody is sitting. In that case, the young Buddha, because it's a Buddhist temple. What is he doing here? He's sitting there with his two arms here, making some movements, sitting because he believes he's in the small vehicle to reach the big vehicle of the gods. Now look at this. Just look at it with modern eyes. Here we have Palenque. It becomes a stupa, and it disappears. It's all a question with what eyes we look at it. But finally, worldwide, it's a similar tradition. In different forms, different words. And this continues. What I said before, what nerves me, what makes me crazy every year is Nazca. You all remember Nazca. What do I have against the scientists in Nazca? Nazca is this gigantic desert, roughly 500 kilometers south of Lima in Peru. When you fly over Nazca, first you see nothing, simply a desert, with brown and yellow stones and sand. And then all of a sudden you see some figures of fishes, monkeys, spiders, and all kind of things that are such overdimensional size that you can see them only from the air. Then you fly a little higher, then you see something who looks like airstrips. Starts abruptly, ends abruptly. The longest of these lines is 3.8 kilometers long. The longest. Then you see smaller lines. You know, there are these airstrip line, lock line, and smaller one. The longest of the small long lines is 23 kilometers long. Straight ahead. Huh? 23 kilometers. About 18 kilometers. Miles, 18 miles, roughly. So what nerves me here? Practically every year on world television, you see so-called documentaries. And when the normal people see a documentary, they believe this is science. This is real science. They teach us what you see. But in reality, they don't show us the reality. I show you now 20 pictures about Nazca, which you have never seen, neither in the scientific textbook, neither in the documentaries. This is Nazca. Original Nazca. Nazca. But what they show you on TV are just the figures. The fishes, the monkeys, the spiders, and so on. And they explain you, it's very, very easy to make these figures. And really, it is easy. It's not a complicated thing. You just have to scratch away the surface, the stones. And normally, a bright, shining surface appears. And with this method, you can make figures. But that's not the mystery of Nazca, Margarita. The mystery of Nazca are these lines. And they never show these lines on television. I said, the longest of it is 3.8 kilometers long. Look at this picture. Put it in your brain. Seal it in your brain. Not on the lights, seal it in your brain. You never see it on television. Neither on scientific textbooks. They suggest to you, Nazca, the mystery of Nazca are these figures. The figures are not the mystery of Nazca. This is the mystery of Nazca. Then you see whole mountain. The mountain top is cut off, completely cut off, artificially. And you see under the line, there are zigzags. You see zigzag? Imagine if this would be the result of scratching away the surface, the stone of the surface. Then you would have scratched away the zigzag line behind also. It's all not true, what they teach us in their documentaries. That's what nerves me. And because it nerves me, all these things, we have decided to clarify all this scientifically. You know, until today, only archaeologists have been working there. I adore archaeology. That's wonderful. And the archaeologists I know are brilliant people. It's not the question of conspiracy, etc. But archaeologists are asking different questions. They're asking how old is it? How old is this bone? How old is this fire, etc. What is it? It's called a temple, etc. I have complete different questions. I want to know what is the chemical composition of these lines. Is it different than the next composition of the sand? I want to know what is the resistance in the electricity. Are there some magnetical anomalies? I want to find out on the scientific way what's wrong. Compare these lines. Compare with the desert just next to the lines. And therefore, the Erich von Däniken Foundation I had the idea to make a scientific expedition there. We found 6 universities who work together with the Erich von Däniken Foundation. One university is the Universidad Católica in Lima, Peru, because you need a local university. Without that, you never get the permission. Then we have 2 German universities, a Swiss university, etc. We need, for a scientific analysis of this, we need roughly 240,000 euros, compared to $240,000. But all these universities are working together. What is left, what we don't have, is about $60,000 left. That's why we decided to look if we find this missing $60,000 by crowdfunding. Look at this up there, the red writing. Take your note. When you are home, please go in there. Look what I say in there, what the idea is, what universities are working with, the names of the figures, what the plan is. And maybe you have the idea, okay, I spend $20 or whatever for the crowdfunding, because we want to realize this. We will start this in fall, that this international scientific team goes to Nazca and makes finally scientific analysis, not only archaeological analysis. In the textbooks, in the scientific textbook about Nazca, I have learned so far, what is it, all these lines? It's a cult for the water gods. It's an astronomical calendar. It's a cult for agriculture. It's a pre-Inca sport place, some sort of pre-Inca Olympia. It's a copies of a Fata Morgana. It's a start place of hot air balloon. These are acre plots, boundary makers, procession street, maps. It's all rubbish. Because if all you have this explanation in archaeology, where are the footprints? Where are the footprints of the people going to the lines? The lines start abruptly, end abruptly, as if somebody from the air has come, and not somebody worked through it. They worked it. And we want to find out all this. Some 2,500 years from now, the Greek historian Herodotus, you learned Herodotus in school. He was called, men called him the father of history. He was in Egypt, 450 BC, 2,500 years from now. He was there for many years. And he also was in Thebes. Thebes is today's Luxor on the Nile. And in his second book of history, Herodotus writes, the high priest showed him 241 statues, one statue next to the other. And the high priest gave to every statue an explanation. He explained that's the name, his name was, and he was living from then to then, etc. And at the end, after 241 statues, the high priest said to Herodotus, these 241 statues represent 11,340 years. At that time, the gods from the firmament were among the humans. 11,340 years. Now, Herodotus made this statement 2,500 years from now, but which means I have to add 2,500 to the 11,340. Roughly 14,000 years ago, according to the father of history, Herodotus, the extraterrestrials were here. Of course, in archaeology, they never took Herodotus by word. According to archaeology, the history of old Egypt starts roughly 3,000 BC, but not 14,000 BC. They said, what is he talking? What is he telling rubbish? The same Herodotus, just a few lines later, in his second book of history, you can control it, chapter 141, 142, he says that under the Great Pyramid, there is a lake. And the lake has clear water. And the clear water, there is a sea. In archaeology, they never took this for serious. Now we slowly go into the pyramid. I show you the lake, the sea, and the detail of it. You know, this should be the entry, But the entry was never found until 823. This is called the upcoming shaft. 23 meter long, you can climb up there, but only 1 meter high. You have to go down on your knees. After 23 meters, you come to the so-called Great Gallery. This is the Great Gallery. This is 47 meters long. Imagine that. 8.5 meter high. And here starts the first question. Why have the builders, the constructors of the pyramid, first constructed this small shaft, so small that you cannot even transport a sarcophagus in there? And then after 23 meters, this gigantic thing, we don't understand it. Then you come to 2 chambers. One chamber is called the king's chamber, the other chamber is called the queen's chamber. It looks like this. Now we go into the queen's chamber. That's this one here in the middle. That is correct. Here. That is nice. So, in the queen's chamber, there is a hole in the wall. This hole exists on the south side and on the north side. And it's very important to know this hole exists only since about 180 years before the wall was closed. Then a British explorer came there, and he was looking for treasures. He had a little hammer. He was hammering all the time on the wall, and it sounded hollow. And then they opened the wall. So in the beginning, this was not there. Now inside the hole, there's a shaft. When you point in with your beam, you see it's a shaft going about 2 meters horizontal, and then starts climbing in there. Now, a friend of mine, Rudolf Gantenbrink, constructed a robot. That's now over 20 years ago. This robot is a steel construction, and we entered the shaft going out from the queen's chamber. First, the 2 meter horizontal, and then the robot climbs up inside the shaft. In whole archaeology, the specialist told us the shaft is only about 8 meters long. After 8 meters, it comes to a blind end. But the robot continues. After you will just see it. First 2 meter horizontal, then starts the climbing inside. So the archaeologists believe after 8 meters, it comes to a standstill. But that was not correct. The robot continued inside. He passed the 8 meter mark, continued climbing inside the pyramid. 10 meter, 12 meter, 15 meter, 20 meter. Archaeologists could not respire anymore. They couldn't understand what's going on here in the Great Pyramid. He climbed up. Always the wall changed. It was granite. It was sandstone. It was basalt. All kinds of different stone. You saw openings who looked like doors. Now you have to understand, this shaft is only 14 centimeters by one side. You cannot send a man in there to climb in there. Only with the robot it's possible. After 62 meters, the robot came to a standstill before a little door. The little door had something like 2 bracelets. You will just see it. It was crashings on the wall. So thousands of years ago in the past, somebody must have pressed something inside here, which left bracelets behind. The stones here of this wall are alabaster. Alabaster looks like a marble. Very, very polished, very precise. So these pictures were taken roughly 25 years ago by this small robot you saw before. There was a stone blocking the continuation, but the robot made it. He overtook this blocking, continued his trip inside. This was meter 32. He continued 40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters. At 62 meters, the robot came to a standstill before a small door. And the small door had something like two little metallic bracelets. You will just see them. The wall here is alabaster. You see how polished and direct it is. Don't forget, you are 62 meters inside the pyramid, starting from the Queen's Chamber. Get bloody well. Yes. The metallic bracelets. Now watch the next picture. The robot had a laser, and the laser beam will touch this door, and the laser beam will go under. You see the red point here? The red point here down is from the laser beam. And the laser beam will cross under the door, which means there must be something behind this door. This cannot be the end of the shaft. Again, all this was 25 meters years ago. What happened since then? At that time, 25 years ago, public was more or less informed. There was a robot in there, but you hear nothing. What happened since then? You hear nothing in the public. After this demonstration here, the American National Geographic Society came down to Egypt, and they constructed a new robot. And the new robot, he had a drilling, and with the drilling they made a hole into this door. You see here. And they pushed the light inside, and all what they could see, there was nothing behind it, except the next wall. It was empty. Then you see the next wall. That was the situation roughly 18 years ago. What happened since then? A rich man from Singapore, he wanted to know what's behind it, and he gave the order to construct another robot, robot number 3. The first robot was from Gantenbrink, the German, the second from the National Geographic Society, or the third robot constructed by this rich Hindu man from Singapore. And he called it the Jedi robot. Funny. They made a hole again through this wall. You see, there's the first wall with these two metallic bracelets. Then comes the next wall. And now he makes a hole into the next wall. Small hole, just big enough for an endoscope. They put an endoscope through it, some light. What's behind it? The next room. You know, when you put an endoscope, you cannot make gigantic big pictures. You make hundreds of small pictures. And in the computer, you put these small pictures together to a big picture. And that was behind it. The next room. So it continues. First room, second room, third room, all behind it. You cannot, we know exactly the geographical location. We know exactly what it is. So the skeptic will ask, why don't we go in there and open it? Because you cannot. The shaft is 62 meters high, but the shaft has only a width of 14 centimeters. You cannot climb in there. You need high-tech to do so. High-tech is very expensive. And you need the permission from the Department of Archaeology and Antiquity in Egypt. And they never give you the permission. So this continues. We know under the Great Pyramid is another room. It's called the unfinished room. The tourists, normally, I guess you have all been in the pyramid. And you go in the pyramid, you can climb up the Great Gallery, but you can never climb down. In the rock under the pyramid. Here again a shaft. This time the shaft is big enough, you can climb down there. It's a little more than 1 meter. Not this one, just the next one. The shaft goes down into the rock under the pyramid. This shaft is 119 meters long. Imagine, 190 meters, going diagonally down there. And then you come to a room in the rock under the pyramid. You know, 190 meters, yeah, diagonal. If you look it directly, you are 38 meters in the rock under the pyramid. There is a room, it's called the unfinished room. It makes absolutely no sense. 830 and 23 BC, now after Christ, the pyramid was for the first time opened by Al-Mamun. He was the ruler of Egypt at that time. He also found this room. He was down there. And he writes in his biography that down there he found 3 other rooms. 3 other rooms. In one room he found sarcophaguses with strange beings which had long, elongated head. Strange weapons which he could not understand. And strange objects in their hand. And he was afraid. He was afraid about the power of the god. He gave order to change everything down here that no one after him could rediscover these rooms. I was down there many times. I always had a hammer with me. You knocked at the wall. And sometimes it sounded hollow. But you can do nothing. You cannot continue. Something has changed somebody has changed the whole situation down there. And now comes the story with Herodotus, who says there is a lake under the pyramid, a lake with clear water, and the clear water covers a sarcophagus. I said, archaeology never took Herodotus' word serious. He's dreaming. He speaks about 11,340 years. He speaks about the lake under the pyramid. There can be no lake. There is a lake. We were down. Ramon here, my wonderful young man, and I were down there. The entry side of the Great Pyramid. You come first to this small room. You go down the staircase. From this point, there is a shaft directly in the rock. Anyhow, this shaft is so large that it has room for 2 ladders. You see 2 ladders here? Then you come to a room, which is in the rock of the pyramids. That room. Here, 7 niches are cut out of the rock, but only in 2 niches are some sarcophaguses. This one is black basalt. The next one is granite. The other ones are empty. Crystal completely, perfectly chiseled out of the rock. From this point, you go deeper again. Now you just saw a shaft which had room for 2 ladders. The continuation is this one. It's not the same shaft. You will see there's only room for 1 ladder. Now you are under the pyramid, deep under the pyramid. And then it's in the right angle crossing. You have to go down in your knees. A few steps and you are under the pyramid, and there is a lake. Exactly as Herodotus told us, with perfectly clear water. And inside the lake is a sarcophagus, exactly as Herodotus has written 2,500 years ago. In the beginning, you see nothing. You need your eyes. We could not use flashlights here. As soon as we would use flashlight, we simply have a reflector like a mirror, and we have no pictures. Now you see the sarcophagus here, in the water, covered by clear water. They told me the sarcophagus was empty when they found it. I don't know if this is true, but that's what they told me. And there's the water. Now, the Antiquity Department of Antiquity in Egypt, they wanted, of course, to know where does the sarcophagus come from, because the shafts are smaller than the sarcophagus. They could not transport it down there. You remember the one shaft just with 1 ladder? This is bigger. So there must be other entries. So they were pushing out the water, and here you see the same sarcophagus without the water this time. What a precision. Incredibly. That's the newest knowledge in the Great Pyramid. Okay? Okay, yes. So, is werden we dan grappie. Dat gaan we weggezet. Erop al weg. Dit komt, ja, mijn kat, dings. Ja, past this weer. The skeptics, who of course are reasonable person. I told you I love skeptics. You know, we live in a society, the scientific community always want to be reasonable, and they are afraid to be ridiculed. That's why they never touch something like UFOs or extraterrestrials. No, ridiculous. In reality, they don't know much. I'm accused, and all of my thinkers are accused. We say that extraterrestrials were there, and we say that these extraterrestrials visited us from far away. This is absolutely impossible. Every child knows the distance in the universe are measured by light years. So you cannot cross these light years. The next star is roughly 4 light years away, and it could be 10 or 20 light years away, so we have no possibility to see each other. Even if extraterrestrials do exist, we never came together. That's what the skeptics say, but it's all not correct again. Imagine your American space shuttle, you have it here, bring the space shuttle. Yeah. With every shot up there, you can transport a heavy load of 30 tons. Now it's just a question of money. How much money do you use to invest? If you have 3 space shuttles, for the moment you have none, you work together with the Russians, if you have 3, or if you have 30. If you have 30 space shuttles, then you would start every week, not every few months, every week. And every week you would transport 30 tons of heavy load into the orbit between Earth and the Moon. These heavy loads are prefabricated blocks. You cut them all together to a gigantic spaceship. The spaceship has the shape of the form of a ring. This is a must, because when you have the form of a ring, you turn the spaceship, and by turning around its own axis, you create an artificial gravity inside by centrifugal force. So you always have ground under your feet. You're not weightless. And then you have to put the propellant in there, and slowly this spaceship starts to move. Slowly. If it only would reach 2% of the speed of light. I'm not speaking of over speed of light, all this scientific, just 2% of the speed of light. You would reach a distance of 10 light years within 500 human years. Now you say, come on, 500 human years. No one of us will become 500 human years old. It's not necessary. This is a generation spaceship. On board you make love, you make children, grandchildren, and on. So after 500 years, you have reached the distance of 10 light years. So it's absolutely possible to move in the star, between one of the other, one star and the other. Even with primitive technology, not with light speed or nearly coming to light speed. Of course it is possible. The critics, the skeptics never mentioned this possibility. Generation spaceship. Then the next accusation is always, even if extraterrestrials do exist, and even if they could reach us, they would never look like we. They would never look like humans. They would maybe look like elephants or flying tentacles or whatever, but never look like us. This is wrong again, and this is a theory which I shortly explain. Panspermia. Panspermia was brought into the world by the Swedish Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Arrhenius. It was 90 years ago. The following idea is panspermia. You go out with a spaceship, as I explained. You create a new society. And now the first society has an interest to spread out themselves. As we have plans at the moment, we want to go to Mars. And from Mars, we go to the next solar system, and so on. Spread out yourself. Spread out yourself means humans are spreading out themselves. You can do it also by spermia. This is why panspermia. You infect a section of your Milky Way with your own informations of life. And it will work, and you create on planets which are similar to the planet Earth a new evolution of form of life. This is panspermia. It works. So it is quite possible that extraterrestrials look like us or look similar to us. All the arguments, this is not possible. They are not looking like us. Forget it. It is possible to reach the distances. It is possible that they look like this. So, unfortunately, my time is over and I have to stop. I want to remember you, take your time and look at this crowdfunding, because that's something which I have in my soul. I want to have scientific results concerning Nazca. I want to shock the world again with scientific, clear results and say, I'm sorry, what are you telling us? Here we have the scientific result brought together by 5 different universities. We can do it, and we will bring it to public. Ladies and gentlemen, you were listening to me. Thank you.
Listen, we just want to ask you a few questions, get this whole thing cleared up. Have you met my partner?
What's this about?
Are you party to any tax avoidance or tax evasion schemes? Are you an underwriter at Lloyd's?
What?
We just want to know a little bit about your income. Are you an artist or a farmer? Decide now.
I don't understand.
Do you create literary or artistic works?
No.
Farmer, eh?
No, I'm not a farmer.
You married? What's your spouse's national insurance number?
I don't know.
Calm down. It's just a crime if you make any mistakes. You want a coffee? I'll get you a coffee. Have you made the direct or indirect disposal of the whole or part of an interest in UK property or land when either non-resident or UK resident and the disposal was in the overseas part of a split year?
Maybe.
There you go.
Thanks.
You got a receipt for that? Oh dear.
If your child is presumed by law enforcement authorities to have been kidnapped by someone who isn't a member of your family, you may be eligible for child tax credit. Prize money you receive on account of your participation in the Olympic or Paralympic Games is maybe non-taxable.
In the last couple of Best of Year discoveries, I mentioned how the unfortunate state of the world allowed us to find some pretty awesome Easter eggs. And as to whether or not things have improved from the previous year, I don't even want to talk about that. This is why we're diving into the top 10 best mysteries and discoveries of 2021. Brought to you by Genshin Impact. Use my link in the description down below to get Genshin Impact for free on your devices right now. And adventure upon the new island area in Azuma of Travelers to find new fantasies on your journey. Star Wars Starfighter. Thanks to Sly Cooper Reload Code for submitting this to the Unheaded Discord. Star Wars Starfighter is a submitted 2001 spaceflight simulator that takes place during the Battle of Naboo from the 1999 film The Phantom Menace. Both Star Wars titles I thoroughly enjoyed as a kid despite their obvious drawbacks. Well, one of my favorite hackers and YouTubers, Sly Cooper Reload Code, was feeling a bit nostalgic themselves and began going through the code of the game and uncovered many debugging tools the developers left over. Using a command they found to generate any model in the game that they wanted. They noticed there was a model for a Jar Jar in the files that, as far as they knew, never actually appeared in the game, which when they spawned in gave them this dork, Jar Jar Binks, the annoying comic relief character from the Phantom Menace that many consider the worst Star Wars character of all time, except for some reason in a barrel and even complete with animations, which is rather unusual for an asset that wouldn't normally appear in the game. After doing a bit of reverse engineering and some investigating, Reload Code was able to determine that the model did actually appear in the game, apparently on a mission rescue on the Solo, and determined it was set in an invisible state and code to suddenly appear after a specific voice line in the game was set, which plays after destroying the very last island turret on the mission. With all the information they needed, Reload Code played the mission up until the point of destroying the last turret, and then decided to ignore the normal mission objective and turned around and faced the large waterfall towering over the environment, looking near the top to see if anything would happen. And sure enough, Reload Code seemingly discovered for the very first time this. As far as I and Reload Code could tell, there doesn't appear to be any other mention or documentation of this ever before, leading us to believe this is the first time this Easter egg has ever been discovered in 20 years. Regardless, it's unbelievably satisfying after 2 decades. We finally get to see the son of a get thrown off a waterfall in a barrel. Rayman 3, Hoodlum Havoc. Thanks to frequent contributor Cyclone Joker for submitting this discovery rating. Some of it discovered for the put 4A platform. And second rate offers about this 93. Is this craving some making quite ambitious with the game's code was entered into the game. At the time, no players had figured out how to activate the Easter egg. Until in April this year, Twitter user Unlisted Cheese was finally able to crack the code. By entering a sequence of balloons, a gem, the McDonald's, what the hell's going on? The McDonald's sign actually transforms into the 3D engine that programmer Kazuhiko Ishida developed for Treasure's logo screen, which allows the player to select from different models and rotate them around. Your screen would make the Sega logo explode, which is respect. Were they planning on showing how they made them? Though really, I don't. Quarantine. Thanks to Dark Alchemy ICX for submitting this to the Unheaded Discord. Quarantine, a concept we're all familiar with at this point, is an interesting title from 1994 in 3.0 and MS-DOS, where he plays a cab driver trying to escape a chaotic city that's been walled off from the rest of the world, controlled by an ominous outside corporation that contaminates their water supply and drives its citizens mad. 3.0. Quarantine. Thanks to Dark Alchemy ICX for submitting this to the Unheaded Discord. Quarantine, a concept we're all familiar with at this point, is an interesting title from 1994 in 3.0 and MS-DOS, where he plays a cab driver trying to escape a chaotic city that's been walled off from the rest of the world, controlled by an ominous outside corporation that contaminates their water supply and drives its citizens mad, which plays like an interesting concoction of Crazy Taxi, Doom, and Grand Theft Auto. The developers, funny enough, going on to later join Rockstar Studios, who made the Grand Theft Auto series. Whilst remembered for its over-the-top intro and striking cover, that's a windshield wiper smearing away some blood, by the way. The game also hides particular secret Dark Alchemy found that will be sure to never make anyone see the game the same way again. As Dark Alchemy remembered as a kid inputting a money cheat incorrectly and coming across something he certainly never expected to see, at least at his age. As by using an emulator today, he found by going to the language setting in the menu and entering the code CBCA, you would hear a scream, which doesn't initially seem to do anything, until you realize every single character you pick up in your cab is letting it all hang out for everyone to see. Whoa, did not need to see that. Dark Alchemy even got a response from a developer on Reddit who revealed he had no idea that the new code was on the 3DO version, but knew it was on the MS-DOS version and gave him the code for that. Thanks, can't wait to check that one out. Good job, Dark Alchemy, for confirming this horrendous discovery does truly exist on the 3DO version for the first time in 27 years. Now, if you can just excuse me, I'm gonna go wash out my eyes. Halo 3. Thanks to Corbin Petland for submitting this on oddheader.com beta last year. It didn't take long for Kurt to want to start by enough warthogs that this would be intact here. Homefront, The Revolution. This discovery takes us all the way back to 2019 on the channel. When I covered my video 10 game discoveries never meant to be found part 3, then the 2016 first-person shooter Homefront, The Revolution, and Arcade Machine can be found the game that led to 2019 on the channel. When I covered my video 10 game discoveries never meant to be found part 3, then the 2016 first-person shooter Homefront, The Revolution, and Arcade Machine can be found the game that allowed players to play the first 2 levels of the classic shooter Time Splitters 2, which confused data miners as they managed to find every single asset from the entire game of Time Splitters 2 completely redone. Found the game that allowed players to play the first 2 levels of the classic shooter Time Splitters discoveries never meant to be found part 3, then the 2016 first-person shooter Homefront, The Revolution, and Arcade Machine could be found the game that allowed players to play the first 2 levels of the classic shooter Time Splitters 2, which confused data miners as they managed to find every single asset from the entire game of Time Splitters 2 completely redone in HD sitting in the files of the game, leaving me only to speculate why, considering only 2 levels were actually playable on the cabinet, or at least so I thought, as only a couple months later a developer, who wished to remain anonymous, saw this segment and in response Response reached out to me and my friend and collaborator Easter Egg Hunter to reveal there actually was a way to play the full Time Splitters 2 game in Homefront: The Revolution. But due to announcements from its publisher of an official Time Splitters HD re-release supposedly around the corner, the legal ramifications of revealing such an egg was unclear, leading me to heavily hint about the unfound Easter egg and Easter eggs that were never found part 2. And so the search was on, largely led by Tanflow1997 on my Discord server, who started another server where much more progress was made on the egg, but the final solution managed to always evade them. Then this year, completely out of nowhere, a separate developer from the one that contacted me and the Easter Egg Hunter, Matt Phillips, let the cat out of the bag, revealing the full game was hidden in the cabinet, but didn't explain how to unlock it. Tanflow1997 requested some more information. The developer spoiled that involved inputting a code that's been lost to time. This prompted data miner and hacker Spencer Perot to quickly bounce back with the code he pulled from the data of the game, which when players went and entered on the level select screen, finally revealed a full playable HD remaster of Time Splitters 2 that's been hiding in Homefront: The Revolution for 5 years since its release in 2016, which finally lifts a weight off of my chest, as it was hard keeping that a secret, which I was only doing not to get anyone in legal trouble, especially considering Deep Silver did publicly indicate that they were going to release a future Time Splitters game. Well, hopefully Matt Phillips isn't in any hot water right now, as Deep Silver releasing the remaster now is pretty much out the window at this point. Dark Judgment. Thanks to Mills for submitting this discovery on the OnHitter Discord. Earlier this year in my video 7 Easter eggs that haven't been found part 3, I talked about the action arcade beat-em-up side-scrolling game Dark Judgment, which was released in Hong Kong in 1997 and finally released worldwide on Steam for the first time in 2020. In that video I detailed how in 2016, the game's sprite designer wrote a blog post about the game, mentioning a hidden playable character he called Tomato Girl, who apparently was hidden so well no player had ever managed to find her, leading me only to imagine what Tomato Girl could really be. As just a few months after my video, Mills combed through the data of the game and figured out by pressing down, left, down, right, down, up, down, attack as player 1 on the player select screen, you would finally unlock Tomato Girl, which apparently was only a nickname as her name is actually Frankenstein. Not exactly sure how anyone was supposed to find that. Not most ass out of anyone, with some for just about everyone. Lost in the sea of countless entertainment types, startled by the image of a skull team to remember the game's cartoon picture of the game. Sure enough, they did find a pop-up screen in the file's feature game, as well as a hidden setting display specific card in the prompt that they found in obscure places for elaborate "Is this your card?" tricks. Glenn revealed an interesting twist. It wasn't so much an Easter egg that was supposed to be found, but rather a magic trick, as well as a tribute to his favorite Mitch Keller performed when you would then the Dead Penguin. But as far as he knew, it was never actually prompt tricking your without them noticing. Get your friend to play the game, and then crash the plane in Las Vegas where Penn and Teller performed, when you would then say, "Is this your card?" as the card they chose appeared on screen, tricking your clueless friend on the wiser. Glenn revealed Penn and Teller declined to get their endorsement for the Easter egg like he had hoped, so instead he put in the Dead Penguin. But as far as he knew, it was never actually properly implemented. So how Natalie managed to be struck by this unnerving image, as well as why Glenn thought a dead version of one of the game's characters was an appropriate replacement for a card trick, may just be questions where we'll never know the answer. Five Nights at Freddy's, Sister Location. Thanks to Ashley for submitting this on OnHitter.com. The fictional Freddy Bat game for the first time in 5 years, I completely did one key simultaneously for exactly 1 minute and 20 seconds. The game suddenly switches over to a blue screen, and then by pressing one again immediately after, it would suddenly switch to a strange display of flickering numbers, some of which eventually go static. The hell is this? What's particularly mysterious about this is Ashley confirmed that every step of this discovery is intentionally hard-coded entirely different, and is specifically made to display much larger than the only ones with scripting on them, none of which have anything to do with in any way connected to the story. But are absolutely clueless why this is intentionally hidden the way it was or what it could possibly be, chucking this one up to be a great big who the hell knows. Dread Out 2. Thanks series about schoolgirls who fight off ghosts with still cameras, whereas Dread Out is an Eastern horror series about schoolgirls who fight off ghosts with phone cameras, using what the game calls an iris phone, which allows its users to see more than the human eye can perceive. Michael initially submitted to my website that he was carrying along the perimeter of the environment when he heard noises that indicated that an enemy was nearby, but couldn't determine what it was or get closer to where the sounds were leading. At first that's all it was, until Michael managed to figure out an exploit where if he switched the free camera and then moved the camera far enough away, the environment in his wall collision would deload, allowing him to move his position freely and get on the other side of the barriers. Using this glitch, Michael decided to explore out of bounds of the area where he initially heard the noises, only to realize there's an Easter egg out of bounds featuring this weird-ass dude with a cat, who's apparently a mythological creature from Indonesian folklore named Buto Ijo. But yet this still wasn't where the sounds were coming from, as right next to Buto is a staircase leading down to a dead end that when scanned with your iris phone reveals a strange symbol on the wall. With Michael's newfound wall glitch, he used the trick and was surprised to find the other side of the wall was a room with a lone zombie, only to realize there's an incredibly elaborate tunnel system that stretched underneath the entirety of the environment. Almost immediately, Michael found a bat he could pick up that didn't appear anywhere else in the game, that when observed in the inventory only provided a blank white image, inferring that the bat and its surroundings were unfinished. As Michael descended further into the unknown, he came across several more unnerving enemies to the point that he realized he wasn't going to be able to go any farther. Fortunately, with the use of his wall glitch, he was able to continue forward, and Michael didn't find anything down there at all and gave up. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And if you want to see, okay, fine. Apparently Michael farther. Fortunately, with the use of his wall glitch, he was able to continue forward, and Michael didn't find anything down there at all and gave up. If you enjoyed this video's wall glitch, he was able to continue forward, and Michael didn't find anything down there at all and gave up. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Able to continue forward, and Michael didn't find anything down there at all and gave up. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And if you want to see
Hey guys, this is Blake from Blake Sanctum, retro site for retro games.
Welcome to a special bonus episode of my website and video series covering classic Civilization genre games like Colonization, Master of Magic, Test of Time, Alpha Centauri, Call to Power, and of course the Civ series itself. In these bonus videos, I'll be touring some of the awesome fan games and my favourite scenarios and mods for all these games, as well as my own personal mods, while also trying to sneakily play as the barbarians via hacks or cheats. In my main series, I show you how to play these great old games in HD using either special versions, tricks, or mods. Check out the playlist link up top or in the video description and comments below to see the other episodes. Hey guys, bringing you another special bonus episode of my huge video series covering classic Civilization genre games like Colonization, Master of Magic, Call to Power, Alpha Centauri, and of course the Civilization series itself. And in these bonus episodes, I take a closer look at fan games and mods that enhance or recreate these great old games. And this is one of the best of them all, the Freecol Project. Now, the Freecol Project is a fan-made remake or sequel of sorts to the great almighty turn-based strategy classic Sid Meier's Colonization. And this fan game project has been worked on for like 20 years now, so it's packed full of features and great content that I'm looking forward to showing you guys later in this video. We can already see one of its features playing right now in that they have a nice intro video using what appears to be old footage from movies and documentaries. In fact, I'd love to know what movie these naval battles are from, as I love a good colonial ship-of-the-line documentary or film. But anyway, I'm going to give you guys a nice big tour of Freecol in this video, and I'm also going to talk a bit about about games that are similar to colonisation and fan games and mod projects related to colonisation. Then I'll talk about some of the awesome third-party mods for FreeCol that add heaps of new maps and factions to players, and then I'll start a new game to show you how FreeCol looks. And then I'll load some gorgeous and action-packed save games from much later in the game to really show off FreeCol's features. So if you want to skip ahead to any of these parts, then I'll be putting time skip links in the video description below. This bonus episode is part of a bigger series where I'm showing people how to play each Civilization genre game in HD, as well as doing bonus episodes showing off cool scenarios and mods and how to play as the barbarians and some console conversions. So to see all that, make sure you check out the playlist link in the video description below too. Now I'm a huge colonisation fan. I grew up playing it all through the 90s and have returned to it every few years in the decades since. And one of my recent playthroughs, I actually managed to get the game working in HD via a virtual machine, and it looks awesome on a big screen. So if you want to see more about that, check out my main colonisation tour video in this series. I'm such a huge fan of this game that over the last year I've also been creating several social media groups on Facebook and Reddit and Discord for colonisation, as I couldn't believe that this great old series had no presence on social media, so feel free to join these groups and I'll stick links in the video description. Now colonisation did of course get an official sequel/remake with the Civilization 4 colonisation game, released in the 2000s. However, a lot of fans were not very happy about a number of things with that game, and thankfully that's led to some huge mods of it that either make it feel more like classic Col or add heaps of extra features to massively expand the game, which I hope to cover in future videos. But if you want more of a classic look, then that's where something like this FreeCol project might be of interest to you. As being a 2.5D isometric game, it really reminds me of that Civ 2 late 90s era, and sort of makes it feel like it bridges the gap between the 2D classic colonisation and the 3D Civ 4 colonisation eras. There's other cool retro options for fans too, such as the recently released fan game called Treasure Fleet that looks very late 90s Civ 2 era, but has a number of interesting changes to the classic colonisation formula. And another one I recently found was the Free Mars, a fan game that combines colonisation and those good old Civilization Mars scenarios. And it basically really is Sid Meier's colonisation, but just on Mars. I mean, everything else is practically the same. It's really cool and I've enjoyed playing it, so I'll probably cover that later as well. And speaking of Civilization, there's a whole bunch of fan-made scenarios and mods for Civ games that allow you to colonise the entire world, or even play as the natives to keep those pesky Europeans out. I talk more about these in my main colonisation video, and I'll do more videos in the years to come covering these awesome games and mods. Oh, and speaking of trying to play as the natives, I'm doing a bonus video series where I try to play as the barbarians in every Civilization game via hacks and cheats. So I've also been trying to take control of the natives in colonisation too, with some mixed results. I'd love to try in FreeCol too, but the devs say it's impossible. But if I ever do succeed, then I'll do a separate video about that too. Now let's get stuck into FreeCol, shall we? This fan game has some really cool advantages over classic colonisation. It's actually still worked on even today after like 20 years, with new fans coming in and adding new features. Now what are some of those advantages, you ask? Well, for starters, it's highly moddable and comes with a whole bunch of cool third-party mods, including ones that later plant forests and train native workers into regular colonists, and there's custom units and resources and graphics and different interface types like the classic wooden interface that was used in older versions of FreeCol, and one of my favourites being the ability to play as more than the original 4 nations from colonisation. In fact, we're about to go way past that limit, but I'll show you more on that in a minute. The other advantage in FreeCol is that it's highly customizable, because this was originally a port of the FreeCiv engine, so it's retained a lot of those wonderful options to really play. I mean, just look at all this stuff. You can play with the natives, you can change their attitude and massively increase the amount of their settlements on the map, which will go great if you increase the main nation's player count too. You can play with the monarchy and government settings and money and the amount of good and bad rumours you get, and AI cheating as well. There's all sorts of stuff. Now, when starting a new game, if you leave things on default, then you'll end up with the traditional 4 nations game of classic colonisation. But if you scroll down here, you'll see an extra 4 nations come with FreeCol, allowing you to have big 8-player games. So just imagine that, games with twice as many nations as classic colonisation. You just have to change their availability to AI, and then they'll be in the game. And of course, you can play as them too if you want. But wait, there's more. As you saw me mention earlier, I've installed Mazim's New Nations mod, from which you can get from the FreeCol forums, and that adds another 4 European nations, allowing for frickin' 12-player colonisation. games. How crazy is that? And on top of all that, these should work in multiplayer too. Although you can imagine how long the game turns would be if you had like 12 human players. So, maybe just you and a mate versus 10 other AIs might be best. Now, Mazim, the modder that made this, is also working on yet another 4 nations, including some Asian ones, allowing for 16 player games, which would be insane. Of course, we're getting rather historically inaccurate with adding all these extra nations that didn't colonize America, so that's why they're staying as the third-party modders. The developers felt they were already pushing the limits of believability when they added the Russians and so forth. But anyway, I'll go as traditional England, and now for the next awesome part. You can either generate your own random map using a whole bunch of different customizable settings, or you can select from all these custom maps. There's so many now in the latest test versions of FreeCol. There's a whole bunch of variants of the Americas, and then you've got Africa and Australia, which is of course tempting for me being Australian. There's also multiple Caribbean maps here for any Spanish fans watching this, and you've even got Super Earth maps, which I'll show you more of later. So just imagine a 16-player game on a giant Earth map with the natives increased to maximum as well. Biggest colonization game ever. I'll also show you guys the map editor included with FreeCol that was used to make these maps a bit later too. Now, if you want to be more traditional and go with a nice Americas map, then don't worry, there's some great options here. This one is probably my favourite, as it's pretty huge, probably 3 times the size of the original colonization Americas map, and I had a brilliant test game on this, which I'll be loading up later. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Mazim's also working on another mod that adds more native being finished since then. Oh, and I should also point out that FreeCol Jeff Briggs colonized victory conditions. Head out of the Pioneer guy with some tools. For a Jeep, for those things with advisor instructions, Civ and colonization games, so we can make a a bit different to the old one. Most of the interface in this game is done with sort of like a paper look, and there's also a great modding scene, which is and a lot of mods actually come with the latest versions that allow you to activate an old wooden interface. There's one that allows you to plant trees, like in Civ. I wish I'd seen that before I started my big game, because sadly you can't activate the start a game. You've got to do it before you start one. And planting trees would have been awesome, because you plant jungle, all the terrains are respective of whatever terrain you were planting on. Really cool stuff. Now that is a lost city there. What could go wrong? Crickets, worth 68. Why thanks. And we'll go meet the natives, usually get a nice thing for that. There we go. Oh, lots of things happening. So we're founding father, Indians no longer demand payment for their land, so it's a handy one, isn't it? And Henry Hudson, Chris Fur Trappers. There you go. Pretty cool. But nevertheless, functions pretty much the same way. Yeah, once you meet, which is very handy because of trading with the Indian. America's game, I was playing as English and I colonised in crazy. Now we just started a new Indian village there, and so there was all this nearby, and it was just massive at this time. Look at the South American map and that, and then look at the one here. Like literally, the Amazon was like. Now, this is ridiculous. We tell straight away, there's a huge amount.
First netbook I ever owned. I have a lot of fond memories of using this minuscule laptop and just taking it with me all over the place. So I thought it would be... This is the Asus EEE PC Model 701. Released all the way back in October 2007, it was the first netbook I ever owned. I have a lot of fond memories of using this Asus EEE PC Model 701. Released all the way back in October 2007, it was the first netbook I ever owned. I have a lot of fond memories of using this minuscule laptop and just taking it with me all over the place. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at it again today, see what we can do to speed it up, and see what the experience is like 14 years later. And we're going to do just that right here on Print and Play Retrospective. The EEE PC specs are almost as minuscule as its form factor. It sports an Intel Celeron 900MHz processor, but it's underclocked to 630MHz in order to lower power usage and heat generation. It comes equipped with 512 MB of DDR2 RAM and came installed with either Windows XP or a distribution of Linux, depending on which one you purchased. This is the 4G version, which might make you think it has integrated cell servers, but no, the 4G in this case is the 4 gigs of soldered-on storage on the board. For display, the 701 sports a 7-inch screen, featuring a pretty low resolution of 800x480, which doesn't even hit S-Video standards. Located on either side of the screen are two speakers that aren't nearly as big as the black borders around them would make you think. They're pretty tiny and sound pretty tinny, but they do the job. Above the screen is a feature that's pretty standard today, an integrated webcam, which was useful for doing video chats back in the day. The keyboard on the EEE PC is not particularly pleasant to type on. It's about 20% smaller than a regular laptop keyboard, and it ends up feeling very crowded and it's easy to mistype on. Below the keyboard is a single-touch touchpad, which is also comically small. It works alright, but you'll find yourself lifting your finger more frequently during use than you probably would expect. Despite its minuscule footprint, the EEE PC sports a surprising amount of I/O. On the left side of the machine, it has an Ethernet port, a spot for a phone cord to connect to the optional internal modem. Then we have a single USB 2.0 port, a vent that is connected to the active cooling fan inside the laptop, and separate connectors for both microphone and headphone. On the right side, we have a full-size SD card slot, two additional USB 2.0 ports, and a VGA output which will allow you to connect an external monitor. The rear of the unit is primarily taken up by a 4-cell battery pack that powers the unit when it's not plugged in, but you'll also find the DC in jack back here as well. Before we start playing with the unit, let's see what we can do to upgrade it. Flipping over the laptop, we have a small square removable panel, and we get to see this unit is actually a little special. Not only does it have a socketed slot for RAM, but it also has a mini PCIe slot, allowing us to expand on the internals. First, I've ordered an adapter that will allow me to connect a mini SATA SSD into the expansion slot. I found this 60GB SSD on Amazon for $25, which should be more than enough. Ordered an adapter that will allow me to, not only does it have a socketed slot for RAM, but it also has a mini PCIe slot, allowing us to expand on the internals. First, I've ordered an adapter that will allow me to connect a mini SATA SSD into the expansion slot. I found this 60GB SSD on Amazon for $25, which should be more than enough storage to accommodate everything this thing can handle. Next, let's replace the memory. The Triple EPC supports a maximum of 2 gigs of DDR2, so I'm going to go ahead and give it the maximum. I'm also going to take advantage of the SD card slot by installing an 8GB SD card that I've pre-written with the Windows XP installer, as well as drivers and some support software. This will also result in the SD card being required to boot the laptop, but it also means the machine will no longer have any reliance on the internal 4GB of storage, which should help improve its longevity. Now, for the moment of truth. And we have library as well as drivers and some support software. This will also result in the SD card being required to Windows XP installer, as well as drivers and some support software. This will also result in the SD card being required to boot the laptop, but it also means the machine will no longer have any reliance on the internal 4GB of storage, which should help improve its longevity. Now, for the moment of truth. And we have life. Popping into the BIOS, we can see that it sees not only the new SSD, but the 8GB SD card as well. One Windows XP install later, and everything is looking pretty good. I've gone ahead and set up the theme to Windows Classic so it uses as little resources as possible. I installed a piece of software called Triple E Control that allows us to manually adjust the fan and the speed of the processor. To give this thing its best chance in gaming, I'll go ahead and set it to run at the full 900 MHz. I've also installed an old version of Daemon Tools. This allows me to emulate an optical drive since the machine clearly doesn't have one of its own. Then I can store disk images of my favorite games on the SD card, and it's fully portable and ready to go. I started off by installing a game I spent a lot of my time playing in the early 2000s, Star Trek Armada. Now, this game is notoriously fussy about what it will run on, and while it played reasonably well, the audio is definitely off. It stutters and skips, and while sometimes lowering the acceleration on the sound card will fix it, it didn't work in this case. Star Trek Armada 2 ran better, with sound and video working fine. While I enjoyed both games, I always found that Armada 2 tried to complicate things for no good reason. Still, I'm a sucker for games that reunite the original cast to do the voice acting for them, so this was a hit for me. Motocross Madness runs really well on here with very little stuttering. I don't know if I ever played this game the way it was meant to be. I usually just drop into Stunt Quarry and drive around. And, like everybody else I knew that ever played this game, I spent a bunch of time learning how to get out of bounds, only to be rewarded with this. The original Half-Life capped out at about 71 frames per second, although it didn't stay there the entire time. Traversing the Black Mesa Research Facility would lead to occasional drops below 60 frames per second, and, of course, when everything went sideways during the experiment, the frame rate suffers. Overall, this is a perfectly playable experience, though, and I had a lot of fun getting back into it. Unreal Tournament is still one of my favorite arena shooters, and fueled many of the first LAN parties that I ever went to. I spent many late evenings on Facing World or running around on other maps with a shock rifle set to Instagab. It's fast-paced ridiculousness, and it plays very smoothly on the Triple EPC. Quake 3 Arena saw lots of gameplay during those early LAN parties as well, and the Triple EPC tackles it like a champ. Of course, these aren't online matches, so the experience might change on a crowded map, but you probably wouldn't want to get too competitive on a 7-inch screen anyways. Speaking of which, if you find this thing too tiny with the integrated screen, then it's an excellent time to bust out your favorite CRT for some big screen action. For even more fun, set it up with dual display and run Winamp on the integrated LCD. But so far, all the games I've tested on this were released around the turn of the century, a good 5 to 7 years before the Triple EPC was even released. So what if I threw a game that was current at the time of its release at it? Well, to test that, I decided to try and load up BioShock. Only then to remember that BioShock requires an online connection in order to finish installing, and I unfortunately do not have a lot of trust in this copy of Windows XP if I were to bring it online right now, so I scratched that idea. Other games that I tried were Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the original, not the new one that just came out, and unfortunately I couldn't get it online. Then to remember that BioShock. So what if I threw but so far, all the games I've tested big screen action. For even more fun, set it up with dual display and run Winamp on the integrated LCD. But so far, all the games I've tested on this were released around the turn of the century, a good 5 to 7 years before the Triple EPC was even released. So what if I threw a game that was current at the time of its release at it? Well, to test that, I decided to try and load up BioShock. Only then to remember that BioShock requires an online connection in order to finish installing, and I unfortunately do not have a lot of trust in this copy of Windows XP if I were to bring it online right now, so I scratched that idea. Other games that I tried were Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the original, not the new one that just came out, and unfortunately I couldn't get any of them to start, so it looks like I'm pretty much stuck with older games. Overall, this was a bit of a blast from the past for me. Getting to play some of the old games that I loved playing back in the day on hardware that supports it pretty well was a lot of fun. In fact, it took me quite a while to get this video done because I would often run longer in my gameplay than I really needed for footage. I'm glad I kept this EPC around, and it still runs great after all. It took me quite a while to get this video done because I would often run longer in my gameplay than I really needed for footage. I'm glad I kept this EPC around fun. In fact, it took me quite a while to get this video done because I would often run longer in my gameplay than I really needed for footage. I'm glad I kept this EPC around, and it still runs great after all these years. And with these new upgrades, hopefully it'll last even longer. And that's it for this one. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you're new here, subscribe. There's going to be more retro tech coming out real soon. Promise less than 2 years in between videos this time. And leave a comment down below if you had one of these in the past and if you did anything to upgrade it and what you used to use it for. Alright, you guys, well, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.
Price per share, otherwise known as the stock price, that is the price per share, which at a very basic level is just the market cap divided by the share count. Just like earnings per share is net income divided by the share count. Because all the metrics that we were looking at are divided by the share count, it normalizes the difference in share count. So I just did a very, very basic example here. Company A and Company T. Company A earning $2,500 per year, Company T earning twice that amount. Company A has 500 outstanding shares, Company T has twice that amount at 1,000. So in both cases here, dividing total earnings by outstanding shares yields $5 off earnings per share. Now with both companies carry a 50 times price earnings ratio, Company A will have a $125,000 market cap, Company T would have a $250,000 market cap. Then to get the price per share, you would divide the market cap by the share count. Both of them come out at $250. If both of these companies double their earnings and continue trading at that same 50 times price earning multiple, both companies would then have a share price of $500 per share, doubled from where it was. So yesterday when we were talking talking about Amazon having $4.90 earnings per share and a share price of $830, and Tesla being the exact same. And then a year from then, when Amazon reported $6.15 earnings, but the share price was at $1,400, if the market priced Tesla at the same earnings multiple, which is kind of the whole point that we were making, then the Tesla share price would also be $1,400 per share. Yes, the market cap would be higher, but earnings would be as well. You're just dividing it out into more pieces. It just so happened to work out in this case that Amazon and Tesla had both the same earnings and share price. I think that's probably responsible for some of the confusion here. But even if they weren't, you can always make these types of comparisons. Oftentimes you just have to do a little bit of multiplication or division. So let's say the company T had a stock split 1 for 5. Everything else is exactly the same. You just now have 5,000 shares instead of 1,000
Today,
before.
we step back
earnings of 5,000. That's now $1 per share, but everybody has 5 times more shares, which are priced at $50 per share instead of the $250 that they started at. It's all the same stuff. And you can get back to making the exact same comparisons that we were making before, getting back to that levelized starting position, which is basically what we just naturally happen to have. You just need to mentally convert, divide the outstanding shares by 5, multiply earnings per share and price per share by 5 as well. It's all just algebra. I promise it all works. The only thing to be aware of in circumstances like this is that the size of the company does matter, because a bigger company has potentially less room to grow, right? So you need to understand that you probably wouldn't want to compare a $5 trillion company with a $100 million company in the same way, but I think Amazon at that point in time, Tesla right now, close enough to make the comparison pretty valid. Obviously, no comparison between two businesses is ever going to be perfect. There's always all this context that goes along with it. But to me, I think this is strongly informative, and maybe you don't agree, and that's okay. Diving deeper on that question of, okay, Tesla being a larger market cap company, let's look at some of the numbers here, because I think these are pretty interesting too. Amazon in 2016 was doing $136 billion in revenue, and their GAAP net income was $2.4 billion. So we're getting out of the per share stuff now. We're just going to look at it on a total business perspective. If we look at those numbers for Tesla this year, Tesla posted $54 billion in revenue and $5.5 billion in GAAP net income. So yes, Tesla does have a bigger market cap than Amazon had at that point in time, which might lead you to believe that Tesla has less upside than Amazon had at that period of time. But I think that would be a hasty conclusion to make, because as we see, Tesla right now has less than half of the level of revenue that Amazon had back in 2016. And even though Tesla's business is smaller scale, smaller revenue base, they're earning more than twice as much as what Amazon was. Personally, I believe that Tesla has a much larger total addressable market as well. That's why the growth outlook can continue to be as high or even higher than Amazon was at that stage in their business back in 2016. That's why I believe that Tesla can carry a similar or higher multiple, and eventually that multiple is what brings us back to the per share comparisons. So to an extent, questioning that comparison is valid. It's not because of how the math works out. It's about the size of the companies and what their respective total addressable markets and growth outlooks are. If Tesla didn't have that strong outlook, then yes, it would be a very bad and flawed comparison to make, but my opinion is that it does, and I think I probably just going to gloss over that because I feel so strongly about it. Additionally, as I did mention yesterday, we're talking about two different periods of time here, so two different macro environments, and that is very important. But one data point that is very interesting from that period of time is that the Fed was in the process of raising interest rates during that start of 2017 to 2019 time period that we were looking at. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into the macro environment than just the federal funds rate. Doesn't mean the macro environment is the same or going to be the same now. It never really is, but it does also demonstrate that high growth, high multiple companies can be successful investments during periods of time of interest rate increases. So I don't know, hopefully all of that is helpful to at least some extent. It was nice to see a lot of those comments and questions yesterday to kind of keep this discussion going. So definitely if you have any questions, let me know in the comments today. One other quick point that I did want to make while we're kind of talking about earnings related stuff here is on Tesla's guidance. So we talked yesterday a lot about the CEO compensation plan. Tesla saying that they're recognizing the last two milestones as probable achievement. One of those was hitting $14 billion in annualized EBITDA. That was pretty obviously going to happen. But the other one that was sort of on the fence was $75 billion in annual revenue. So Tesla marking that as probable means that for the next 12 months, their internal forecast is higher than that number. So yes, we know Tesla talked about 50% more vehicle deliveries, but this also implies that revenue would grow at least 40% this year. Nothing groundbreaking there, but sometimes Wall Street expects Tesla's average selling price to drop to such a degree that revenue growth would slow dramatically because of that. And we have seen Tesla's average selling prices decline over time. So the distinction between the 50% delivery growth and a different number for revenue growth is an important one to consider. So I just wanted to make sure that that was pointed out. And to be clear, I'm not saying that Tesla wouldn't grow revenue at 50% or more. I'm just saying that they're saying here that it will be at least 40%. All right, last couple of things here as we wrap up the week. Let's look ahead to next week. Next week is the beginning of Chinese New Year, so there should be some downtime at Giga Shanghai. We'll kind of try to keep an eye out for how that might impact February production numbers and see if we can get a better understanding of what that scheduling looks like. Then, of course, big earnings week again next week. So GM on Tuesday, Ford on Thursday, Amazon on Thursday as well. Automaker reports should be interesting and lend for a lot of comparisons between Tesla's performance this year and theirs. We'll see how the market reacts. Didn't really seem to like Tesla saying that they're going to maximize the efficiency on one product line and earn a ton of profit from it. For whatever reason, those intraday reactions seem to be a little bit more excited about announcing, 25 different variants that they can't produce and spending billions of dollars on those. Lastly for today, then, I'll just leave you with a couple of new photos of the Cybertruck that have surfaced as the Cybertruck continues to be at Giga Texas. With that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you are subscribed and sign up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter at Twist as the Cybertruck continues 25 different variants that they can't produce and spending billions of dollars on those. Lastly for today, then, I'll just leave you with a couple of new photos of the Cybertruck that have surfaced as the Cybertruck continues to be at Giga Texas. With that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you are subscribed and sign up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And if you're interested in supporting what I'm doing here, you can find details about doing that at patreon.com/Tesla Daily Podcast. We'll see you again on Monday for the January 31st episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.
time when monochromatic and color screens lived together in harmony, and no one had quite figured out what the best mouse substitute was on a laptop, or even the best location for the pointing device for that matter.
Jaws, thanks for subs. Can I get a Blam at 12 and then sharp, please? You're on, Jaws. Oh, what would this be? Fucking corn and mussels. There you go. Corn, sweet corn and mussels.
I'm a professional streamer.
Oh, my day. Fucking corn and mussels. There you go. Corn, sweet corn and mussels.
I'm a professional streamer.
Oh, midday. There you go, that's your midday Blam. As promised.
This is the AST Advantage NB46SX/33. It's powered by the Intel 46SX processor. Today, we step back to a time when monochromatic and color screens lived together in harmony, and no one had quite figured out what the best mouse substitute was on a laptop, or even the best location for the pointing device for that matter. This is the AST Advantage NB46SX/33. It's powered by the Intel 46SX processor running at 33 MHz and was originally paired with 4 MB of RAM, although this one's been upgraded to 8. For storage, it sports a 120 MB hard drive, and external storage is handled via the 3.5-inch 1.44 MB floppy drive on the right-hand side of the unit. It has a 10-inch 640x480 VGA display, which is monochromatic, coupled with a graphics chipset that's capable of 256 colors. And while information was a bit sparse, it looks like this unit came out around the end of 1993 and had a suggested retail price of $1,800 US. That's about $3,400 by today's standards. The keyboard is pretty small, but it's still surprisingly 3, which is monochromatic, coupled with a graphics chipset that's capable of 256 colors. And while information was a bit sparse, it looks like this unit came out around the end of 1993 and had a suggested retail price of $1,800 US. That's about $3,400 by today's standards. The keyboard is pretty small, but it's still surprisingly comfortable to type on. The buttons aren't mechanical or anything, it's just responsive and feels pretty good to the fingers. And one of its most standout features is the integrated trackball. Located just above the keyboard, the ball still rolls mostly smoothly, and the 2 action buttons below it are nice and clicky. It's small and functional and kind of cute. But for the majority of this video, I'll be using an external mouse. When I bought this laptop, it came with a Logitech mouse that's in the shape of, well, a mouse. But unfortunately, it also kind of looks like it's been chewed on by a mouse, so I'll be sticking with this Microsoft Serial mouse instead. On the left-hand side of the laptop, we have an integrated modem, which is most likely a 14.4 baud model. It's completely modular and is accessible via the sliding door beside the trackball. For additional ports, the Advantage has most of the ports you'd find standard. It's completely modular and is accessible via the sliding door beside the trackball. For additional ports, the Advantage has most of the ports you'd find standard on laptop offerings at the time. Serial, parallel, VGA, and PS2 mouse ports are all accounted for. And when not plugged in, the Advantage can be run off of its internal 14.4-volt NiCad battery pack. These days, it holds just enough power to let you plug it back in if you tripped over the power cable, but back when it was new, you would expect to get a couple hours out of it. Well, let's get it powered on and see what it can do. The BIOS is pretty basic and is also pretty standard for what you'd expect at the time. One option that's offered is the ability to invert the LCD, swapping black for white and vice versa. You end up making pretty heavy use of this feature depending on the software game you want to use to get the maximum viewability out of it. This machine is still running the original operating system it came with, which is Microsoft DOS 6.2, coupled with an AST-branded install of Windows 3.1. In terms of installed software, it's pretty Spartan. It looks like it's mostly just the original operating system itself and an installation of Corel WordPerfect. As a word processing unit, it works quite well. I'm not going to break any speed records typing on it, but the screen is clear and the keyboard is fine to type on. This would definitely have been fine for getting some work done on the go. In terms of games installed, well, there wasn't much on it when I got it. Solitaire and Minesweeper are there, but it doesn't look like any others have been added. Well, before I started messing with it, I installed my parallel port zip drive and used it to back up the restore directory, just in case the drive on this machine ends up failing. Some work done on the go. In terms of games installed, well, there wasn't much on it when I got it. Solitaire and Minesweeper are there, but it doesn't look like any others have been added. Well, before I started messing with it, I installed my parallel port zip drive and used it to back up the restore directory, just in case the drive on this machine ends up failing and I need to replace it. Then it was time to move on to installing some of my own games. I picked up this laptop because it reminded me of the one my mom would sometimes borrow from one of her friends when she needed to type a document before we got a computer of our own. And one of the games I discovered on it. I picked up this laptop because it reminded me of the one my mom would sometimes borrow from one of her friends when failing and I need to replace it. Then it was time to move on to installing some of my own games. I picked up this laptop because it reminded me of the one my mom would sometimes borrow from one of her friends when she needed to type a document before we got a computer of our own. And one of the games I discovered on it early on was Leisure Suit Larry. This game is definitely not safe for work, as the whole goal is to help the main character Larry, let's say, become a man. But playing it on here immediately brought back memories of sneaking around to play this game on that borrowed laptop as a kid, hoping not to get caught. And at some point as a kid, I stumbled across a demo for a game called EGA Trek. Probably walking the borders of copyright infringement, this was the first Star Trek game I ever played on a computer. Playing it on the black and white screen proved a challenge, however, as the grid that displays the galaxy uses color coding to let you know where planets, spaces, and enemies are, so I ended up having to guess quite a bit. And of course, we have to try a Commander Keen game. And this is where the lacking refresh speed of the type of display used on this becomes apparent. This technology dates back to before active TFT displays became prevalent, and it was never really meant for this type of high-speed action. Side-scrollers end up being a bit of a blurry mess as you make your way through the levels, and while not entirely unplayable, it's definitely not ideal. While I trial Planet X3, I want to take a moment to welcome all the new subscribers that have joined the channel over the past month. It's great to have you all here, and I promise there's a ton more retro hardware and software coming your way. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe too, that way you won't miss any of it. That have joined the channel over the past month. It's great to have you all here, and I promise there's a ton more retro hardware and software coming your way. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe too, that way you won't miss any of it. Planet X3 runs quite well on this machine, and since it's targeted for older machines with less supportive displays, it's not too much of a surprise that it finds itself right at home here. One thing that's lacking for retro gaming on machines like this is an integrated sound card. For DOS games, this means the best you can do is the PC speaker for music and sound. But in Windows, you have a little more flexibility. The thing on machines like this is and since it's targeted for older machines with less supportive displays, it's not too much of a surprise that it finds itself right at home here. One thing that's lacking for retro gaming on machines like this is an integrated sound card. For DOS games, this means the best you can do is the PC speaker for music and sound. But in Windows, you have a little more flexibility. The PC speaker driver allows you to play wave audio using the PC speaker, so while you can't use it for MIDI playback, you can still get some basic sound effects out of Windows games and applications. Just make sure to enable interrupts or your mouse is going to freeze every time it plays a sound. Next, I thought, why not try out some early DOS console emulation? So I started with one of the first Nintendo emulators, Nesticle. Of course, we're still stuck with monochromatic graphics and no sound, but gameplay on this machine is pretty close to full speed. Even if it is a little slow, without sound, it's not all that noticeable. And for a splash of color, we can always connect an external display, since the Advantage is capable of doing 256 colors at 640 by 480. The next emulator I tried was the No Money Game Boy emulator. I figured a black and white handheld with a slow blurry screen would probably play to the strengths of the Advantage. And yeah, this looks and feels pretty much just how it did on the original console, with a little less green tint to it, and the speed seems to be pretty good. Of course, the other lacking feature for great emulation is the ability to use an external gamepad. Due to the I/O on this machine not including a joystick port, and coming in far too early for USB support, you'll be limited to playing on the keyboard alone. And as you've probably noticed during this video, the screen is not in top form. It experiences flickering and weird ghosting from other objects on the screen. These issues don't occur on an external display when connected, so it's most likely some failing capacitors around the internal display that are causing the issue. If you guys want to see a teardown and recap in the future, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Overall, the Advantage is a pretty capable little laptop. It's not a great candidate for retro gaming with its slow response display and lack of internal sound card, but if you're satisfied with the PC speaker and willing to connect an external display for faster paced offerings, then this type of machine may serve you well. Hey, that's it for this one, and thanks as always for watching until the end. And I'll see you again in a couple of weeks on another Print and Play retrospective.